So this morning's speaker is Roshi Robert Althouse. It's always a special treat when he comes to speak to us. He's been a meditation practitioner for over 50 years and has been teaching for over 30 years. So the wisdom here is just something that's always special whenever he's able to share with us. And he's going to be talking to us this morning about a subject called the Great Turning. Thanks very much, Roshi.
Good morning, everyone. I've asked Sensei to ring a mindfulness bell every 10 minutes so that I'll slow down a little bit. I might get, just slow down and pause. Sometimes it's hard to hear it on Zoom, so I asked her to hit it extra loud so I would hear it. I'm so grateful to be here this morning with all of you. It snowed this last week in Chicago area. The snow is beautiful. We live, at least Oak Park was settled by the English in the 1830s. And before that, this place was occupied, it was the land of the Potawatomis, the Kickapoo, the Miami, and the Peoria tribes. And then closer to the lake in the Chicago area, there were also the Potawatomi, the Miami, the Sioux, and the Fox tribes. And the word Chicago is an Algonquin word, which is Shikakwa, which means striped skunk or onion. So that was what they called the garlic, I think it was actually. The garlic and onions grew, and still do to this day, grow in the wet areas along the rivers. You've surely seen them if you live in this area and you've been out in nature at all. So I want to talk about the Great Turning this morning. This is a phrase that was coined by Craig Schindler in 1989. And I'll speak in his words to explain what he meant. He coined this term, and he meant, quote, turning away from self-destruction toward a new era of human dignity, racial justice, and environmental restoration, and peace. Peace within and peace without. The phrase has since then been popularized by Joanna Macy quite a lot, and is now being used for a 4-month workshop that's going to begin in March that I'm participating in, and I invite you to participate in it too if you're so inclined. And you can find out more about this at greatturning.net. I've put their website in the chat box. This Great Turning is part of a very large movement that doesn't seem to really have a name. It has no ideology particularly, or ism. And when Paul Hawkins looked into this, and he wrote a book called Blessed Unrest, how the largest movement in the world came into being and why no one saw it coming. Paul Hawkins, who's a longtime environmental activist and one of the most optimistic still environmental activists that I know of, which is saying something already. To be working in this field and still be optimistic is extraordinary. But he began to research who was doing this work, and to his surprise, he discovered that there were over 2 million organizations around the world working on behalf of social justice and environmental restoration. That's a lot of groups. And we never hear about them. Not on the corporate news, we don't hear about them because they don't get ratings. It's not bad news. It's not bad enough. Murder, mayhem, violence is what we hear about, and politics. Paul Hawkins said it's the first time in history that a movement of such scale and breadth has arisen from within every country, city, and culture in the world, with no leader, rule book, or central headquarters. It is vast, and the issues broadly defined as social justice and the environment are not separate issues at all. And he goes on to say that he sees it as the planet's humanity's immune response to protect the planet. I have wanted to talk about this for a long time to you, and I have never known how to talk about it. I'm not sure I still know how to talk about it, but when I heard of this workshop being done and the phrase "the Great Turning," it touched something in my heart that, and I feel it's important. So I don't know if I'll talk about it well this morning, but I'm just going to show up and try to say something about it, and I hope it's helpful. I don't want to depress you. I don't want to quote a lot of depressing statistics because you already know them. You already know what's happening. And if you don't, you're just not paying attention. But I do think what we do, and I can say this for myself, is that I have numbed myself down so I don't have to feel the pain or the grief. And I pay a price for that. And I don't want to pay that price anymore. Wisdom is always about a larger context, and when we aren't wise, when we don't trust wisdom, we pay a price. And we all know about suffering going on in our world. We've probably, all of us have experienced it personally, among friends being sick, family members, people dying close to us. We're in the third year of a pandemic. I heard that. So how can we talk about this so that we can show up and find a way to bring it into our attention and our awareness without being devastated by the scale of the problem? I think for me, first of all, let me say this great turning is an interesting word because in our Buddhist tradition, we have the notion of the three turnings of the wheel of the Dharma. And the first wheel is considered to be the teachings of Buddha himself and how they got recorded in the Pali Suttas. That's the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And then the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma is considered to be the Prajnaparamita teachings of emptiness and the Bodhisattva vow. And then the third turning of the wheel comes from the Yogacara tradition, which brought up the notion of the Tathagata Garbha, or the seed of the Buddha, or Buddha nature. And now, Joanna Macy says, we are at a point where another great turning must take place if we are going to survive into the future. And it will be every bit as consequential as the agricultural and the industrial revolution, if we are to survive. So I think there's three possibilities here. Anyone we could choose. It's up to us what we choose. We are free to choose. We could choose to put our heads in the sand, which is, I think, at least what I do. I don't know what you do, but I just keep my head down because I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do about global warming. It just seems too big for me. I'm one measly little person on this planet. I'm very small. So one possibility is just keep my head down, forget about it. After all, we have to pay bills, pay mortgages, go to work, raise kids, send them to school. That's so much more immediately apparent than the planet being sick. The second possibility is we could just embrace the great unraveling. We could see everything is falling apart. We could be full of despair and depressed and cynical and say, that's just the way it is. There is going to be no future. But I don't care because I won't be around to see it. We could kind of take that kind of stance. And I think the third possibility is to take the stance that the Great Turning is offering us, is to show up in some way, just to show up. You know, this showing up is, I could say a lot about this. I think practice is very much about showing up. Both Sensei and I have been sequestering ourselves upstairs in the Zen Center for all of January. And I've been trying to do services with you every other Sunday on my Zoom from my computer, and it's just not the same as being in person. So I went downstairs today for the first time to do service with you all. I showed up and I got put to work because someone needed to ring a bell. So I got something to do. If you show up, someone may put you to work, but you have to show up. And I think what the Great Turning is really about is we have to have a shift in our awareness. We are so hyper individualized in this country that we don't know how to work, we don't know how to collaborate and begin to work together. Sensei and I have been to 2 Bearing Witness retreats in Auschwitz, and every time we did it with others. We did it with, many people from other faiths, and I could not have gone to Auschwitz by myself. It would have destroyed me. It was dark. It was a hard experience, but I could do it with others. I think what stops us from showing up is we don't really practice not knowing. We say, I can't do this. I remember the first time I heard that Bernie was doing street retreats. Sensei and I we were living in Hawaii, and I got really excited about that. Oh, Bernie's doing a street retreat in New York. I'm going to go try that out. And then I talked to Bernie on the phone, and he says, well, Joshin, you got to raise $5,000 first. And I said, oh, you're crazy. I can't raise $5,000. And Bernie says, how do you know you can't? I said, well, I really don't know. So I hung up the phone, and I talking to Sensei about how impossible Bernie was. And then I kept thinking about it. I said, I really want to go on that street retreat. But darn it, I got to raise $5,000 to do it. I can't do that. And then I did it. I raised $5,000 and then I went on the street retreat. But not knowing allows us to show up. But I think what happens with something that's so large, like global warming, that we start with some kind of knowing, and the knowing stops you. I can't do that. You show up. If you show up, something may happen. You may find a way, but you don't know what the way is until you show up. So if I show up for this workshop, The Great Turning, and I listen to some inspiring talks by people that have been working in this field all their lives, people like Joanna Macy, David Corden, extraordinary individuals, courageous individuals. Joanna Macy is amazing. Then the way it works is we listen to a talk a couple times a month. We make a commitment to be fully involved, engaged with this material. And then between the talks, we have buddy groups, and I'll join other people in the Chicago area perhaps, and I'll learn about somebody down the block that's one of those 2 million people that's doing something. And I didn't know about them. I'm certainly not going to hear about them on the news, but now I know there's a guy down the block doing something that really is inspiring. He's actually doing something. I didn't know about that before. Well, I could help him out. I could show up. He'll put me to work. Co-witnessing. This is a movement about co-witnessing together. We can't do it alone, but we can do it together. We can do something, but I don't know what it is we're doing yet. And I think when we say, I have to know what the answer is before I do something, that knowing stops you from showing up, and you just don't. You don't show up, and then you don't learn, you don't grow, you don't adapt, you don't know. Now, I'm not saying you all have to do this, but I'm doing it, and I feel it is something important to at least talk about. So one thing that happens when we talk about global warming or the environmental crisis is there's that word, crisis. And when we adopt what we might call a crisis epistemology, I don't think it's helpful. What does that mean? Well, according to the Greeks, crisis is a time of intense danger when we have to make crucial decisions. But when we frame it as a crisis, when we look through that lens, three things happen, I think, that aren't helpful. The first is we feel a kind of urgent knee-jerk reaction to fix it. And that leads to instrumental thinking, being attached to an outcome, which stops us from even getting started. The second thing that kind of sense that it's a crisis does, it quickly leads to linear thinking. And linear-oriented thinking is not going to solve this problem. This problem is about a complex global system. And the only way to begin to address this, it seems to me, is through systems thinking. And Joanna Macy has written very well about this for many years. The third thing that happens that I think is not helpful when we frame it as a crisis is we assume that the status quo that we have now is okay, that the way our world is now is stable and it's going to become unstable in the future. But notice that lens that we have downplays so many other worldviews or ways of looking at the world that we don't consider are valid or important, such as, for example, ways that indigenous people understand the world. So rather than frame this as a crisis epistemology, perhaps, and Kyle White used this term, we could call it an epistemology of coordination. That is, a way of knowing our world that emphasizes the importance of our moral bonds, our kinship relationships, and generates our capacity to respond to change. I think, we have the way we look at our world is constructed, but we forget that we've done that. We assume that the way the world is, it's just the way it is. It's not we didn't always have private property even, but that's so baked in now that you can barely even imagine the possibility that there could have been a time when people didn't actually believe in owning land at all. And the way we tell our history carries all the constructs and assumptions that we have about the world we live in now, which is clearly not sustainable. We live in a society that believes in economic system that basically believes in unlimited growth and progress. And that's clearly not sustainable because nature has limits. So we are living in an economic system that is not going to be sustainable into the future, and yet we don't question that because it's so big, it's too big to fail. But we forget that we've constructed that as a way of looking at the world. It doesn't have to be like that. We have this notion of progress. I remember I was working as an artist in Venice Beach. I had a studio there back in the late 70s and early 80s, and I had a job working for Steve Sazek, who had an art store called Ashe Arts. He was a student of Trungpa, actually, and he had an art store in Venice Beach, and I worked for him as a framer. And the frame shop was across the parking lot from the art store, and I had my own little space, and I had a TV, and I would watch things on TV, usually often the news. And one morning, the morning that the Challenger took off, I think it was 86 or 80, I think 85 maybe. The Challenger, I was watching the Challenger take off, and there were 7 astronauts in that. And the thing exploded. So did my world. So did my world. I thought that was progress, and that's not supposed to blow up, but it did. and I was weeping. I'm almost ready to cry just thinking about it now. So what is progress? What are we progressing towards? What are we leaving for the next generation? So I think I could tell you all kinds of depressing things about the planet, but I know you already know these things. Surely you know about feedback loops, right? Positive feedback loops. This is systems thinking. Let me give you an example of a positive feedback loop. You put two microphones too close together, and you get that screeching sound because each one is bouncing off the other. You all know what that's like, right? That's kind of a good metaphor for what's happening to the planet. We're hearing that screeching sound. That's positive feedback. Negative feedback is how we regulate our bodies so that we adapt to our environment, stay alive. If it's too cold outside, we turn up the heat and we stay warm so we don't freeze to death. That's negative feedback. Positive feedback is when the feedback accelerates on itself and just keeps accelerating. You understand what I'm saying here? So an example of and there are lots of positive feedback loops happening on our poor planet at the moment. Just one example is what well known as the albedo effect. I think is that the right pronunciation? Albedo, albino. You know, the sun reflects off of light surfaces. So all the polar ice caps and the snow, all the white at the both poles of the Earth reflect a lot of sunlight, which keeps our planet from heating up because that heat gets reflected back into the atmosphere, right? So that white snow, the white ice, helps to keep the Earth regulated. But when that ice melts, and if it melts too much, then you lose the white that's reflecting the sun. The ice falls into the ocean, there's less white, and now the sun is hitting more water, it's heating up the water is warming up and melting more ice, and that's an example of a positive feedback loop. Now they're moving on each other more and more and more. What's going to stop? So that's an example of a positive feedback loop. And if and there's quite a few happening now, apparently, that's what scientists say. And if those keep going, they eventually reach a tipping point. And so the future is dim from that point of view. We're likely to be in for some rough travel in the future. They had a heat wave in Europe in 2003. 70,000 people died. I could go on and on. You already know this. So if there truly is no self, if the self, we practice to clarify that we have constructed this self, right? And this self is constructed out of fear. Then we've also constructed the world. The world is a construct too. You know, Buddhists we're good at seeing things up close and personal. That's we practice to have this kind of immediate presence to the moment. And we're not very good with analytical thinking. We kind of discourage it. But and we're, Dom Helder Camara, the Brazilian archbishop, said that when I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. But when I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. So we might think it's a good idea as a Buddhist to help feed the homeless, but if you ask the question, why are there so many homeless people? Now someone's going to call you a radical liberal or something worse than that. We're not real keen on advocating for policy change, but that's kind of what's required. One of the things I find in David Corton's vision, which really inspires me, is that he maintains, and he's written, I forget the book, he wrote a very good book on, just look him up, David Corton. He's a very, very thoughtful person, and he's lived all over the world. He says, really, what is needed is we need to reclaim our communities. We need to come back and reclaim our local community. Corporations don't care about our community. They don't care. They're in it for the profit. They have shareholders. They got to meet. That they think in terms of GDP and abstractions, which don't measure the wellness of you or me or our community or the planet in any way whatsoever. It's an abstraction. Greed, anger, and ignorance can be socialized and systemic in our social institutions too. Suffering can be collective. It's not just personal. We suffer together. You might even say our culture has a death wish. Look at the opioid crisis. How many people have overdosed on drugs in the world, in our country? That's a death wish. And people that die from COVID because they don't believe in getting vaccinated. People will die for an ideology. They'll die because they're attached to a point of view about the world that they absolutely hold on to for dear life, and they'd rather die than actually consider another possibility. But we take the precepts, and the first grave precept is to support life. And to me, that means choose life. I'm taking a precept to choose life. And that is a deep, deep challenge for what I do next, in the next moment. I think and I'll close here pretty soon, but I think one of the things that makes it hard for Buddhists sometimes to approach the environmental crisis is that we have two ways that Buddhism has kind of come into the world. One is that there's a kind of notion that there's something transcendent in Buddhist practice, that you're going to transcend and wake up or be enlightened or achieve nirvana. And the sense here is that you're transcending this world because this world is the wheel of suffering of samsara. Well, when you have and you could even, if you if you turn emptiness into another ontological category, you think emptiness is something, you could do the same thing with that. You could say, well, emptiness is something to achieve, but you don't really understand what that is. Because when you have some sense of transcendence, then this world gets devalued. And then it's not so important what happens in this world because you're busy transcending it. And that becomes what your spiritual path is to transcend it because it's suffering. You devalue the physical world in that way. And oddly enough, a lot of the mindfulness movement does the same thing because it's all about me. So my mind is causing suffering, not the world. So the world is devalued again because what's important is that I get my mind in order. And then if I get my mind straight, I won't be stressed out anymore. And that's what my practice becomes. Nothing the matter with that, except it's just a very small view. Again, a kind of denial of the physical world, which is, to me, a misunderstanding of our teachings. The teaching of emptiness is form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So it seems to me we have reached a point beyond no return, and we either just go on with business as usual and pretend like there's nothing happening in the larger planet and live in this very painful reality where there's no future to move into. And I actually, in Chinese medicine, they have a term for this, which translates as the moving into space, the space you move into. Like a sunflower moves to the sun. It has a place to move into. And when we don't have a future that is sustainable, when we don't have a future that we can move into, that leads to things like the opioid crisis because there's no hope. And I think we're all kind of living with that and we just can't bear it because it's too painful. And so I think this work, as Joanna Macy says, starts with not knowing. You just have to really seriously not know. And then bearing witness is to really open to the grief that we're all feeling and we just are holding in so tightly. And that so that's about what I wanted to say this morning. Say two more things. And I learned this from Taoism and Chinese medicine. One way to think of ourselves is we're just the way the universe becomes conscious of itself. That's who we are. And if that's who we are, then we belong here. And the world that we live in is a living world. It's not a dead. One of the reasons why this is a spiritual issue is that we've brought a whole construct from Western civilization that the physical world is basically dead matter. And if you think the world is dead matter, then it's just a resource to be exploited. And that has led us to where we are now. And that's why this is a spiritual crisis. The world is alive. And we can choose to belong in this living world, or we can choose to deny it. And I think the cost of denying this is extraordinarily high. Not only for us personally, but for our species. I think as a species, we have very low self-esteem. So I'll leave you with one final thought. You know, we're so worried about things, the apocalypse and the dysphoria, and we're starting to talk about it. You know, for indigenous people, they're looking forward to the dysphoria. They're looking forward to the disruption. And you say, how can they be doing that? They've been experiencing the apocalypse for 400 years. And we're just waking up to it because we live in this privileged culture. We live in this bubble that people in other parts of the world are experiencing this. One of the extraordinary things about the climate crisis is that it, just like the pandemic, it affects us unequally. People at the poorer end of the scale in the world experience the suffering much more, the consequences of a global, they experience it in a much greater way. There's famines happening in Kenya right now, in Africa, people starving. So I'll leave you with one final thought about transformation. In Chinese medicine, which is very close to Taoism, which I love, it's such a big view of the world. It's a good story. We should tell ourselves good stories. It will help lift us up and move into the future, into maybe a future that we could see as being sustainable. They have what they call beyond transformation, BIAN, and Hua transformation. And beyond transformation is the kind that we usually like, the kind of gradual change that happens over time. And Hua transformation is the transformation that also is necessary where things break down. Things have to break down so that things can grow. But we don't like the breaking down. We only like the growing part. And so when things are breaking down, that's all we see. And then we become full of despair and think nothing is possible. So I want to leave you with this image. You hold a tennis ball in one hand and a tomato in the other, and you squeeze them gently. You just squeeze this tennis ball and you squeeze it harder, and you know it has a resiliency, it bounces back. And we think of resilience kind of like that, bouncing back. Now, if you hold both this tennis ball and the tomato plant in your hand and you squeeze them both really hard, the tomato plant's you're gonna get tomato all over you. It's gonna splash all over the friggin' place. And you think, oh, that's horrible. And yet, next year, if you're a gardener, you'll know, because you've had this experience, there'll be 100 tomato plants growing up there where you crush that tomato. There'll be 100 seeds coming up. Nature is very resilient that way. So what we think of as being a crisis and a death might just be something that's making room for something else to grow. So I'll leave you with that, and I think the Great Turning is a way to begin to look at our world with new eyes, where we say, I'm going to choose life. I'm just going to choose life. I don't know what it means, but I'm going to choose life. I'm going to take that first precept seriously, and I'm going to show up. And I don't know what that means. I don't know where it's going to take me, but I'm going to choose that because I have to. I don't know why. I'm speaking personally. I don't know if this is true for you, but I don't mean to put anything on any of you. We all have our own ways of showing up and living in this world. But for me personally, I have to do this workshop that starts in March. I have to. And the grief is starting to come slowly, little by little. And I feel as I grieve, I start to wake up a little more. So that's, thank you. Okay. So, questions, comments? We have time for discussion because I didn't talk forever.
Roshi, you mentioned that there's been a cost to numbing yourself. What would you say that cost has been?
Oh, lack of vitality, lack of joy, lack of hope for the future, a kind of resignation of spirit, more. What do you think the cost is, Jeremy? Does that ring a bell for you? What might it be for you?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious because I noticed I sort of want to numb myself to situations as well. I haven't quite thought about the cost, but that's why I was curious. It seems like you've recognized that in yourself.
I do.
Yeah.
I just invite you to see if that's true for you in some way, and how does it come up for you?
Yeah, I think for me, maybe the bandwidth, like if I'm narrowing life down to this, then I can't, although I don't have to deal with the grief and the negativity, I also don't get to take in all the joy and all the positive things as well.
Yeah, I think Joanna Macy is a really good guide for us. She starts with gratitude. She says, I'm grateful to be alive. It's in this extraordinary moment. I'm so grateful to be here at this moment in time, to be able to witness life. And then as I open my heart, I can't, the grief it's right here. I told some of you yesterday when it's, and I think we hold it off, we hold it back, and we pay a huge price for that in terms of our vitality and our joy and our sense of being aligned with something. When we're not aligned, when the earth is unwell, we're unwell. And when we're not aligned with that, when we don't bear witness to the unwellness of the planet, then we're unwell somewhere in ourselves at the same time. And in a strange way, grief is the way we come alive. But I don't know that I can really explain that. But I know it in a deep place of myself. I know that grief is part of opening the heart. The grief is for all the suffering, us human beings, but also for the species that are being lost and for the coral reefs that are dying. Just look at a picture of a dead coral reef. That's a picture of grief. If you remember when the oil was coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, that's grief. Just look at that, and that's grief. It's a rabbit hole that we go down, and I totally understand why we don't want to do it, but because it feels like it'll just never end. But I do think part of this work is starting to open to the grief. It's what brings us back to life in some way.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that on a personal level.
Thanks, Jeremy. And thank you for the work you do as a physical therapist, helping. I may have to come see you soon.
Hi, Yoga-san here. I think that the way we treat the earth, the horrible destruction and abuse of its resources, I see it as a reflection, as a global reflection of us and how we treat each other. I understand. I mean, you can look 2 blocks down the street and see somebody who is personally involved in changing the earth. But you can also look no more than 2 blocks away from him and find horrible examples of child abuse.
Yeah.
There was a person on the screen that I'm looking at. You won't have to go more than 3 blocks from your house to find it. To find what we do to old people in nursing homes. Well, I could go on, but I think if you want to change the world, if you want to save the earth, it has to begin with saving each other.
I couldn't agree with you more, Gyoko-san. I think that's what I was saying about David Corton's vision. It's local. We start by changing that elderly home so that we create some policies where they treat them better. And we start by working in our communities where the suffering is taking place. Let me just give you an example of how this works in the world. I was talking to Michael the other day, and he has a home out in Ottawa now, and they have a Walmart's there. And you know what happens when a big corporation like Walmart's comes into your local town, and they're predatory. They take out all the local family businesses. And we're saying, what happened to the family businesses? Well, Walmart came to town, and then we all shop at Walmart or Amazon because that's what we do. But in the process, because we're just not thinking about it, we've devalued and put out of business the local family businesses that made our community alive, that gave it vitality. So I'm not talking about, we don't have to do some dramatic thing to save the planet. We could just start on our block or the block over in our community to start to empower and find the vitality and grow that from the ground up, our community. And I think that's I'm not talking about utopia here. I'm talking about an actual practical way that we might start. And I think starting in our communities is more realistic than some people may want to work at a global level. And that's fine too, but I do think that part of this vision is coming back and seeing that where our well-being is in the community, not on the news, not in some abstract economic system that we have no part of.
Blair.
Yeah, hi. I just thought I'd mention that I belong to the Euclid Avenue United Methodist Church, which is very involved I'm on the Green Action team. And they have like geothermal.
Ah.
They've used a lot of solar panels and geothermal heating and so forth. But there are things that we can do on a personal level as well too, and as a group that and there's an organization in the western suburbs called Interfaith Green Connections. We've been on involved with a group too that is going to be sponsoring I think it's our 5th year or whatever, I forget, the One Earth Film Festival.
Oh yeah.
Which we can do on Zoom now. And it's March 6th. I think it starts the first week in March. There's and you can sign up for movies that have to do with some inspiring and some more, showing the way things are and the seriousness of the climate crisis. I know that we're going to be doing on Earth Day. Our group is going to be just doing a sort of a teach-in on community solar, and we do things like sponsor plastic free, becoming more plastic free or carbon free.
Mhm.
Kind of making pledges, encouraging people to make pledges. So these are things that can at least help us to feel that we're doing a little something, locally, and to contribute to the larger problem, But I just wanted people to know that those options are out there. There's something called the Earth Keepers that there's a couple of trainings. I don't know a lot about what it is, but I think you have to sign up by March 1st if you are interested. And again, I can't tell you exactly what the group does, but it sounds, I like thinking of being Earth Keepers. So there are things that are happening
Mhm.
and groups that we can, affiliate with to
Good.
carry the message forward.
Thank you, Blair. Thanks for that. I'll look into those.
Great.
I just want to point out that One Earth Film Festival has been working for 10 years and is a very viable organization with a wide reach. And the pandemic has helped them reach beyond Oak Park into really, they've really spread out and are reaching people everywhere. And it's a very dynamic organization. And there's 7 generations ahead also here in Oak Park that has been existent for a long time and is doing great work. So one of the things that we might think about as a Sangha is how we might support the efforts of others who are already doing great work. And thank you very much, Roshi, for bringing this topic forward in a really great way.
Thank you, Robin. What film festival was that? Earth Film Festival?
The One Earth Film Festival that Blair mentioned.
Okay. Yes.
Anna Garcia Doyle is heading that organization, and I think you and June have met her.
Well, maybe we'll form a circle and meet occasionally to talk about these things and see what we can do as a Sangha for those that want to do this, if there's an interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I would also love for you to do another talk after your workshop on this.
Okay, I think you'll probably hear more from me.
Okay.
I would love for you to join me in that workshop. I'm trying to enroll allies to help me co-witness this together. I can't do it by myself. It's if you just go and visit the website, you can see what they're doing. It's some just amazing people, and I think something good will come out of it. I've enrolled my teacher and a couple of my friends who are joining me, and we could have our own buddy group as part of the workshop and see what comes out of it. Well, it's 11 o'clock, so I think we've come to the end of our morning. So thank you, everyone, for being patient with me and bearing with this subject matter, which is often difficult to digest. So thank you, and be well, be safe, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshi, for taking on a difficult subject.
Thank you, Earl.